So we talked a little bit about earlier today about the safety of older drivers, and are they really unsafe or are they not? And I think we made the point this morning that the majority of older drivers are really safe and cautious drivers, and there's a number of things that they do to maintain their safety. So they start to reduce their driving, and particularly reducing their driving in driving situations that they might feel uncomfortable in, so in difficult or high-risk conditions. At night, a lot of older people stop driving at night, and in other conditions when it's wet, high traffic volumes and things like that. They may start to make frequent shorter trips, so really reducing where they're driving, travel slower, and they really make efforts to start planning their trips. So that's the majority of older drivers, so safe drivers. However, and I think Nina made this point this morning, a small proportion don't adopt or maintain safe driving practices, and that may well be because they have medical conditions that can affect their functional performance, their cognitive capacity. They may have a lack of awareness of their changing skills, but also there might just be, well, there's a lack of alternative transport options for them, and so driving really is the only option that they have to maintain their mobility. Okay, so we also talked this morning about that importance of driving. So older drivers, they travel, very important to maintain that mobility. So it's one of our most important activities of daily living, driving. It can maintain our health status. It aids in accessing services, social life, and general community mobility. But I think for many older drivers, it really fulfills that life satisfaction. They have their independence, their freedom, their self-esteem, and self-reliance. So really the car still, particularly in the US and Australia, the car still is very, very necessary for undertaking everyday activities. So we did talk a little bit earlier today about giving up driving. And many older adults really feel that losing those driving privileges is a major loss. It's a major loss in terms of their control and independence over their life, social identification, and being able to access all that they want to and when they want to. So there's been a lot of research really looking at the downside, the adverse consequences of driving cessation. So there's an increase in depressive symptoms, lowering of self-esteem and confidence, decline of out-of-home activity, declines in quality of life and life satisfaction. There's also an increase in dependence of others for transportation. But on the other hand, the private vehicle really is the safest mode of transport. So we do want to try and maintain driving or being in a private vehicle for as long as possible. I think we also noted this morning that there are noted negative consequences of driving cessation, but there are also some positives. If people can plan themselves and make that decision themselves, they seem to have a much, much more successful transition from driving to non-driving. Okay, so we also talked a little bit about the licensing system this morning. So I just wanted to touch on a little bit more detail about licensing and testing. So the testing is the fitness to drive. Now, many people or many jurisdictions have age-based testing. So some might say at 70 years of age, everybody needs to come in and get retested to continue their licensing. But there is a lot of research, and Nina, about 40 years of research has gone into the limitations of age-based testing. So the research tells us that so when it's really based on just age alone and not functional performance, it's an ageist approach. Often for many older people, the whole process of having to go in is a daunting and stressful experience. And there is some research that shows that many drivers will actually choose to stop driving rather than take that reassessment. And that's particularly amongst older women. So this really might compromise the mobility of those who may not even need to stop driving. So it's getting some people out of the system that aren't at risk of crashing. So we really need to take into consideration some of those limitations. And so the types of tools that we use to assess fitness to drive, really there's some real challenges in the systems that we have currently. So many of the procedures that jurisdictions and countries put into place, they really fail to recognise that a group of older drivers are not homogeneous. So, there's individual variation. So we all age at different rates. So chronological age really shouldn't be the bar at where we start testing. And there's been some research about assessments based solely on medical grounds are unfair. So we really need to look at, more of a holistic picture. So a given medical condition does not necessarily equate to fitness to drive. We do know some things around some conditions, but as Nina said this morning, some conditions progress very differently amongst different individuals, and there's comorbidities too. So, and a given condition may affect some people in a different way and in different degrees to other people. And also the tools that we have available to us in terms of screening or testing for fitness to drive, they can be imprecise. And again, there's been so much research and implementation trying to find the right mix of screening procedures and tests. And it's really, really a difficult thing to do because of all these variations that we have. So, and across the board, the types of threshold scores that we use, they may really only save a relatively small number of crashes, but it's a costly system of testing many people. And, it could really be taking many people out of the system that don't need to be taken. And many of these tests lack sensitivity and specificity. So it's a system that is a really challenging system. And so we really need to potentially consider different ways of managing older drivers' safety. So we said before, given their physical frailty, older drivers require additional protection in the event of a crash. And we also need to address the gaps in our knowledge and misconceptions of vehicle safety features. And earlier today also, we need much better information on vehicle purchase. So we know a little bit about what we recommend to older adults, but we don't really have much of an idea of what their thoughts are. So we say that the newest and largest vehicles that drivers can handle is a good thing, and we need to promote the purchase of vehicles that have safety features and strong promotion of crashworthiness ratings. Okay, so I wanted to now sort of turn to a study that we undertook a couple of years ago now, really trying to understand older adults' use of safe vehicles, technologies, including ADAS and other technologies for alternative transport, particularly with regard to their awareness of technologies, their acceptance and adaptation to technologies. So really to enhance our understanding of the issues surrounding the use of safe vehicles and technologies. So I think I've just explained all of those: awareness, acceptance and adaptation, but also really asking them some questions about their mobility needs, their expectations for future mobility and intentions regarding the uptake of alternative transport modes. And then also look at their understanding of current resources, tools and programs aimed at encouraging modal shift. So the study components were three components. So we undertook a literature review first, really identifying some of these new emerging technologies that have the potential to address older drivers' safe mobility. Literature on the awareness and acceptance of technology, adaptability to technology, and also the human factors issues, addressing human interacting with technologies. So we undertook a telephone survey and gathered information from a sample of older adults living in Western Australia on safer vehicles and assistive technologies. And then we synthesised the findings of those two components and provided a summary and discussion of the findings and recommendations for actions. So just a couple of points about what we found in the literature review. So many ADASs can potentially mitigate the incidence of common older driver crashes, and these include technologies like emergency braking, intelligent speed assist, lane keeping and forward and lateral collision technologies, so warning systems. And in terms of technologies that can assist and resources that can assist with that transitioning from driving to non-driving and uptake of alternative transport modes, included things like integrated mobility apps. We noticed that there were a couple of them in the US and in Australia. There's a lot of new rideshare and door-to-door and door-through-door services. The Americans are fabulous at providing these sorts of service, and they've really led the way in those door-to-door services, rideshare. We have a colleague who runs Integrated Transport Network. Independent Transport Network, ITN America. And that really is pretty much right throughout America now. It's a really well-used network and system for older drivers. But then we also have other rideshare, Uber, Lyft, GoGet, Greenshare Car and others. And there are also information apps and incentives for public transport and taxi use. We found some in Germany, in Australia, and I think one, yes, that the Fit and Mobile is the German one. So in terms of the evidence regarding acceptability and willingness to pay for technology was actually quite mixed. So on one hand, there was a general view that older drivers perceived that ADAS technologies particularly helped them become safer drivers and improve their driver performance. But then there was also evidence to suggest that older drivers are less aware of vehicle technologies in comparison with younger drivers. There was some concern that there was less interest and that they were less likely to accept vehicle technologies in comparison with older drivers. And a view of some evidence to suggest that older drivers were less willing to pay for vehicle technologies compared with younger drivers. Okay, so in terms of our survey, as I mentioned, it was a telephone survey, and we employed a Perth-based survey research group to make the telephone calls and the interviews. The eligibility criteria were they needed to be a resident of Western Australia, hold a valid driver's licence, be an active driver, and we said that they needed to be driving on average at least once a week and be aged 65 years and over. So the survey was designed to collect a range of data. Firstly, we wanted some participant details, information and demographic details, including their age, gender, marital status, education, employment, and living situation. Then we asked them a series of questions about their driving patterns and driving exposure. So how far did they drive over a year, their crash and infringement history, and the types of driving that they were engaging in. We asked them about their current vehicle, so their current vehicle in terms of their make, model, year of manufacture, the factors that were considered in purchasing that older vehicle, and the perception of their perceptions of the safety of that vehicle. And then we also asked some questions about vehicle technologies. So questions regarding the awareness of their technology, and particularly those that are considered safety features, and their willingness to pay. Okay, so turning to some of the findings. So the majority of participants were your frequent drivers. They drove daily, 61% of them, and most of them were driving substantial differences. So about a quarter of them drove between 5,000 and 10,000 kilometres a year. 23% drove between 10 and 15,000 kilometres. The types of cars that were they most commonly reported having were Toyota, Hyundai and Ford. The average age of their vehicle was 8.2 years, and most of them had actually purchased that as a new vehicle. And it's interesting to note that, because I think the average age of vehicles in Australia is 12 years or so. So they are actually, our older group are actually driving newer cars. Majority of them, 63%, thought that their vehicle was very safe or safe. So pretty much the majority were saying, yep, very safe or not safe. We also asked them when they bought their car, what were their main reasons for buying that car? What were the priority features? And you can see there that the reliability of the car was very important to them, as was the reputation of the make and model. Safety, not so many, about 2/3 of them noted safety as a priority reason, and about 2/3 of them noted that the size of the vehicle was important to them. Okay, now, when we asked them about their awareness of vehicle technologies, we've got a list of technologies that we have there, and we also had some questions about driverless vehicles. So first up, we asked them, do you know what these technologies were? So it's a yes, no, or don't know. And then if they said yes, we asked them, well, is your current vehicle fitted with this? And if yes too, would this be a priority for you in buying your next vehicle? So I won't go through all of those numbers, but I'm sorry these bottom lines aren't showing. But overall, there was a fairly low awareness of vehicle technologies, and this was found to be associated with age. So younger participants were more likely than older participants to indicate awareness of the features. There was very little understanding of specific automation levels. So we're talking about levels 1 to 5. So the majority of older adults said they really don't know what it all means. And relatively few current vehicles were fitted with any of these technologies. But the good news is there was a high priority for purchasing their next vehicle, purchasing a vehicle with these technologies. We also asked them on their willingness to pay for technologies. So overall, almost half of them did not even intend on buying a new vehicle. But for those who said that they would be purchasing a new vehicle, the priority technologies were blind spot detection, AEB, and lane change warning systems. And in terms of the willingness to pay, almost 80% of them stated that they would not pay any additional account for the inclusion of technologies, but particularly driverless features. But there was more reception to the inclusion of added safety features, and most of them would be possibly willing to pay up to an additional $5,000 for a safety feature. Only 10% of them indicated that they would pay over $10,000. So there's a little bit of non-willingness to pay extra for some of these important safety features. Now, when we looked at mobility and transport options, the majority of our participants indicated that they had their transport needs met, and most reported no restrictions due to transportation, and very high satisfaction with their transportation. We also used, I think Nina mentioned, the ARMT, which is the Assessment of Readiness for Mobility Transition. And this test suggested that our sample of older drivers were less anxious and more prepared for mobility transitions than others, comparing that to groups of US-based respondents. We also asked them about just general use of technology, so not technology associated with driving and driving a vehicle. 86% of them said that they considered themselves able to use technology, but the most common barriers that they identified to increase use of technologies were the lack of right experience and the lack of knowledge in using specific technologies. There was some awareness of technologies that were designed to assist alternative transport options, resources like trip planners and incentives, and there was general agreement that trip planning and trip booking services really would improve their planning task. So then we asked them some questions about the availability and their use of alternative modes of transport. Again, we asked, is this mode of transport available in your community? And if available, do you use it? If available and you don't use it, could you use it if you wanted to? And then if you do use this mode of transportation, how often are you using it? And so we asked about being a passenger in a private vehicle, walking, using a bike, public buses, trains, taxis and Uber, rideshare, volunteer drivers and handy transit. So understandably, the use of a private vehicle as a passenger was high. 71% of respondents had access to this mode and used it, while the lowest rate of use were for taxis, 9.3%, rideshare 9%, and volunteer drivers 1.6%. That may well be because we don't really have very good and accessible volunteer driving networks. Most respondents stated that they could use the mode if they wanted to, with positive responses of over 90% for all motorised transport modes. But there were fewer responses were recorded for walking and cycling. So the highest number of trips were made as passengers, with an average of 16 trips per person and a standard deviation of 19.8. The next most frequently used modes were walking and cycling, while very few trips were made using taxis, rideshare, volunteer drivers and other transit services. Then we also asked about their knowledge and experience in using transport-related schemes and technologies. So some of the identified schemes we knew that were available in Western Australia. We asked about their knowledge and their experience. So the schemes are things like public transport fare discounts, door-to-door services with credit point systems, ride shares with discounts, and the use of technologies, things like those trip planners from transport authorities available on the internet. Trip planners from non-transport authorities, and then trip planners used on a mobile device. So most participants were aware of discounted public transport fares for older adults, and a high proportion of respondents took advantage of this sort of scheme. Fewer were aware of door-to-door or rideshare schemes. And when asked about trip planners, there's a roughly even split for each of the categories. However, participants were more aware of services provided for the non-traditional, non-transport authority, such as Google Maps. And for each of these technologies, the majority of participants who were aware already had experience using the technology. So just to wrap this section of the survey up, so there was evidence to suggest that vehicle technologies can address older road users' safe mobility, and particularly the ADAS, forward collision warning and systems, and AEB systems can assist older drivers. There was a generally low to moderate awareness of technologies, but especially a low awareness of specific driverless vehicles. Safety was generally regarded as an important factor when purchasing a new vehicle, but there was some reluctance to pay extra for these features in a new car. There was also some awareness of alternative transport options and technologies to support this. And a number of study limitations. It was a self-report survey, voluntary participation. The sample was a panel from a research group, and it was an exploratory study. So we noted that there is further research warranted to gain really a more in-depth understanding of vehicle purchase. So the types of recommendations that we gave to the government was firstly in terms of uptake and use of safer vehicle. So we suggested that they need to incorporate safer vehicle purchase into broader programs and activity addressing safe mobility. They could develop and implement a targeted education campaign on safer vehicle purchase. And training programs and resources to increase knowledge and experience with using technologies, and engage with car dealerships to enhance the information that they disseminate at the time of vehicle purchase, and potentially some insurance incentives or subsidy schemes for purchase of safe vehicles. In terms of use of resources and technologies to assist that transition from driver to non-driver, we recommended that the government encourages use of public transport and incentivising trips, free off-peak travel, open days, and maintaining government support and funding to public transport providers. Encouraging the use of safe community transport options, encouraging the use of taxis and rideshare services, and also encouraging use of active travel modes, things like educational materials, modification to road design and urban planning, and provide accessible travel information. So that's my section on older drivers' awareness and use of technologies. And now I just wanted to pivot a little bit and talk to you a little bit about some current research that we're undertaking. So Nina talked a fair bit this morning about drivers with dementia and the specific challenges that they have. So we've received some funding from the UK Road Safety Trust and the Government of Australia. So just to give you a few figures on the number of people with dementia, it is increasing rapidly worldwide. In Australia, it's estimated that over 400,000 Australians were living with dementia in 2022, and it's estimated that these figures will double in the next 30 odd years. So the impact of dementia on individuals, families and communities is really far-reaching, and can compromise every aspect of their daily activities and their independence, and particularly as that disease progresses. So we've talked about most adults rely heavily on the private motor vehicle. So for drivers with dementia, the safe operation of a vehicle is complex, and it's most likely affected by functional impairments associated with dementia. So reduced attention, slowed processing speed, it affects executive function and visual spatial skills. Now, we do know that many drivers do continue to drive, drivers with dementia, but most will need to transition from driving. So I think that why I talked about the licensing procedure at the beginning of this presentation is because traditionally the management of older drivers, but particularly this group of older drivers with dementia, falls on licensing authorities and health practitioners who provide guidance to fitness to drive. And it's, as we were saying before, it's a fairly flawed and cumbersome and expensive way to manage older drivers. And there's no uniform evidence-based approach for assessing drivers, particularly with a diagnosis of dementia, and particularly in those early stages. So we do know that in Australia, our authorities can issue a conditional licence, and that requires at least an annual periodic review, and that may be issued to drivers with a diagnosis of dementia. However, there's still no current effective solution for really monitoring the driving of this group and then the safe driving of this group. And that means that it's very hard to assist them for driving as long as they can with a really good monitoring system to identify when their driving becomes unsafe. But then we don't know what that is. There's no objective data on how driving performance changes as dementia progresses. And then there's no criteria for determining at what point it is no longer safe to drive. And that might be really a very, very difficult thing to do. As Nina said before, it's not just one condition. It's often associated with comorbidities. Everybody, deals with these diseases in a very different way. So we've come up with this idea that in-vehicle driving status monitoring systems, DMS, these sorts of systems are increasingly being used in global vehicle safety testing programs, and they're usually addressing drowsiness and inattention. And currently in Europe, they are now implementing DMS into all new vehicles and to monitor drowsiness and inattention. So they're an emerging technology that will, soon be in many, many drivers. So what we proposed to do is to say, let's look at using these types of in-vehicle technologies to monitor driving performance and to alert drivers with dementia to potential hazards. We think that this might hold considerable promise for providing an added, acceptable, unobtrusive approach to support driving, and that can support the relicensing process for the licensing authorities. But there's been no examination to date of the benefits and application of such technologies. So our study, we are currently exploring the suitability of a comprehensive suite of technologies which will capture the broad range of real-world driving behaviours amongst drivers with dementia and vehicle performance measures. So what we really want to do is support safe driving for as long as possible using a DMS, and then also gauge the acceptability and effectiveness of this type of technology as an objective measurement of fitness to drive. So first of all, we need to identify promising DMS. Then we want to examine, identify and characterise the performance parameters associated with the driving behaviours of drivers with early stage dementia and compared with healthy drivers without dementia. And then use all of that information to develop and trial a conceptual design and potential prototype of a DMS for drivers with dementia. So this is our study. So we have 5 phases. So we will be reviewing the literature. Then we'll have 2 main pieces of data collection. We have a simulation-based study and a naturalistic driving study, and then pulling all of that data together using AI techniques, particularly computer vision and machine learning, to really identify those key risk factors. So I flag potentially unsafe driving behaviours unique to drivers with dementia. And then following that, we will look at the potential of developing and trialling a prototype DSM. So let me just tell you a little bit about the simulator study. So we have some high fidelity simulators at Monash. So we'll be recruiting participants with early stage dementia, our case group, and then age and gender matched controls without dementia. So the types of scenarios we'll get participants to drive through, they'll include a series of on-road hazardous events, but they will be things like merging vehicles, road and traffic changes, speed limit changes, unpredictable pedestrians, unpredictable traffic turning in front of them, and bicycle movements. And we have 2 drives, one in an urban area and one in a rural area. We'll also ask each participant to complete a battery of standardised validated assessments to measure a range of cognition, vision, attention and physical functions. And the naturalistic driving study, so we will be fitting participants' vehicles, and we hope to have the same participants in the simulator study and the NDS. So it'll be instrumented with a data acquisition system to collect objective and accurate data during their everyday travel. So the device we have is called a V-Box, and it measures a range of vehicle factors, but it also has a number of cameras on the that we can record video movements and particularly eye movements. So yes, we will look at the participants' driving behaviour, their driving habits, the vehicle measurements, and the behaviour of other road users. So we have cameras facing outward to the traffic as well, in normal and in safety critical situations. And the type of vehicle data we will get, identifying and recognising patterns and objects that indicate risky driving behaviours. So that's the video data. And so it's erratic eye movements, frequent head movements, hand tremor, expressions of anxiety, signs of drowsiness and improper terms. So in terms of the prototype development, at the end of this data collection, so we really need to think about how we can map what the system could look like and operate. And so the findings of the simulator and the NDS will be synthesised to look at what components should be included in the DMS. So looking at relevant functional performance measures, appropriate monitoring methods, the appropriate feedback system and and how it can be integrated into fitness to drive guidelines. So we hope that the system would operate in a similar way to existing technologies. So we'll sense and detect critical changes in performance parameters, and would likely to include a mechanism for providing summary feedback. Not feedback straight away while they're driving, obviously. We would want to provide that feedback potentially at the end of each drive. And hopefully the outcomes will be a fit-for-purpose DMS prototype ready for end-user testing. And this type of monitoring system may be appropriate for other medical conditions as well. So if we can develop one that works for drivers with dementia, we could apply it to other medical conditions and cognitive conditions. So just a summary slide. So our population is ageing. Older adults want to maintain their mobility. Managing their safety. Safe mobility requires a range of approaches, and some of these promising methods include safer vehicle technologies that can transform the way that driver licensing agencies manage risk in vulnerable groups. So thank you, and happy to take any questions. Yes.
I noticed that you used the telephone survey.
I'm sorry?
I noticed that you used the telephone survey
Yes.
for data collection. I wanted to ask what the response rate was, because I know with telephone surveys that's very difficult. And why you specifically chose telephone survey instead of sending out. I know on my survey wasn't really an option for lots of older adults, so you could send out surveys
Yep.
or any other methods?
Correct. I think we wanted to undertake a telephone survey to get more in-depth responses from participants. Now, one of the limitations of the survey I noted was it was a participants in a panel. So, I mean, they had opted in, volunteered for surveys. So we actually had a good response rate, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but I can get them to you. So yes, that was, I think it was actually the funding agency that wanted a telephone survey. I should also say that we have run online surveys as well, and we are getting pretty similar responses. So I guess that's encouraging. I know with our online survey, we got a great response. I think we got 850 participants. So, but very, very similar findings. Thank you. No more questions?
So you mentioned the naturalistic driving data set, and there's a video camera. So I think there's a lot of privacy issue, and I'm just curious how you approach people to getting the study. Because I can imagine there's a camera and recording all of my driving behaviors. So any efforts to do.
Yeah, so we've conducted a number of naturalistic driving studies, and particularly amongst older drivers. So the cameras are inconspicuous, so they don't worry about them. Within half a day, they forget that those cameras are there. And I think every NDS that I know of, people just forget that they have cameras on them. So I don't think that's a problem at all.
To the extent where they do the most ridiculous
Yes.
things, like start grooming themselves,
Putting their makeup on.
or actually I can recall seeing a younger person using their knee to do the steering wheel. I mean, it's just they really forget that the things are mentioned. But no, they signed off. I don't know if there's consent to it.
Yeah, yes, they sign off, yeah. And we generally have never had too many problems in recruiting, particularly older participants, but we've run an NDS with young drivers, yeah, so not a problem, yeah. I think using a simulator has some limitations, particularly for older participants, that there's a higher likelihood of them experience simulated discomfort than younger drivers. So we're very well aware of that, but we have some really good monitoring techniques to know if there is any sign of discomfort.
On that note, I was wondering too, because is it about 25 to 30% that will experience simulator sickness?
Yes.
But I don't know how that relates to persons living with dementia.
No, we don't know.
And that in itself is going to be a very interesting finding.
Yes, yes. So we haven't set our sights too high in numbers of participants, just so we're considering it a pilot, if you like. It would be great if we could get 20 in each group, but understanding that that's an issue. And we also, we've got a number of simulators at our facility. We were going to use a full car with the motion platform with 180-degree screens and screens behind. I believe that would cause much more simulated discomfort than another simulator that we've decided to use. So the other one is more about 3 screens, not 180 degrees, and it has got that motion platform. So we don't think that it will cause as much discomfort. But yeah, that's a very potential limitation for the study.
And an important study in its own.
Yes, so
In fact, you should try it both ways.
Yeah, you're right. And I think in the setup of this study, we're identifying so many limitations of how we can collect data. Opportunities, exactly. Yes, we see opportunities and then they don't quite work out. But then there's another one. Yep. Great.
I have one question.
Yeah.
I feel the Caliban survey is super interesting, and I wonder, does the survey include the commercial driver? I feel these days, because of the Uber and those ride sharing the services, it's a very gray area between commercial and non-commercial driver. And I wonder if that survey included the commercial driver.
Yeah, we didn't. Yes, you're right. So there are other separate studies that some of my colleagues are looking at commercial drivers, commercial older drivers as well. So there is other evidence there, but I can send you some of those studies. Yep. Great. Terrific. Thank you. No more questions? Thank you.